Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Friday, May 20th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris, episode 2 of the week. Only Friday episode so far of the year. I think we're going to get a cover all this year. I think we're going to get every day between now and the end of the year because we did a Sunday one back in April before you went on vacation. I'm sure due to breaking news or winter meeting stuff, playoffs, there's going to be a Saturday episode of Rates and Barrels that gets mixed in at some point, and we'll get to all 7 days, which will be a new thing for us.
Yeah, and also you're on the wrong side. What are you doing over there?
It is weird to be on the right side. Should I switch it?
Oh, that's much better. I feel much better.
I feel more normal because looking to the right side of my screen is where you normally are. It's like, wait, where did he go? We're creatures of habit, that is for sure. On this episode, we're going to discuss a few potential breakouts. If you listen to the 3-0 show earlier in the day on Friday, we found a few interesting names that were really more fantasy names for the most part. The core of that conversation was about Jazz Chisholm Jr. and some of the changes he's made this season, but a few names that are bouncing around out there in deeper leagues, easy players to get via trade where they're already rostered. We'll talk about them and whether or not there's actually something there. Hitters and pitchers, plus the Cards have decided to bring up Nolan, Gorman, and Matthew Liberatore. We're going to bring back Prospect of the Week, not necessarily to spotlight those two guys, but to talk about some other prospects. And we'll talk about a few mailbag questions that came in, including a follow-up about xStats, which we talked a lot about on the show, being limited in their value right now because they've not been calibrated for this season, but there may still be a way to make them somewhat useful, even if they're not as useful as they would ordinarily be. So we begin with the breakouts up at the top, some guys that have taken big steps forward so far. We're going to start with two on the IL, which is always really helpful. Both Josh Naylor and Manuel Margot, kind of more in the better late than never category, even more so for Margot, given that he's a few years older than Naylor. But I think two players that, to some degree, that we've liked for a few years, we've wondered if there is just one more level they can reach. I think the problem with both players, aside from being on the IL right now, we're still dealing with a limited amount of playing time that's small enough to where one great game can change the way your whole season looks, and one bad week could still change the way your entire season looks. All that to say, like, I'm encouraged by what both of these players are doing. And of the two, I actually think Naylor's changes are more convincing and potentially more sustainable for this new level of output going forward once he gets back from the IL.
As opposed to Margot?
Yeah. Margot looks more similar to how he's looked in the past by comparison.
Right. Except that there's this interesting thing going on, which is that the game, the ball, the situation around them is changing. And I wrote a piece today about how the ball is now rewarding line drive hitters more than it's rewarding home run hitters. And if you look at launch angles, there's kind of two distinct pairings or like groupings or areas of launch angle. 0 to 16 degrees is your more line drive launch angles. Those don't go for homers almost ever. I say almost only because of Giancarlo Stanton. He exists. And then 16 to 32 is where you get more of your doubles, fly balls, and homers. And the problem with the ball not going out of the park is that 16 to 32 is being devalued versus 0 to 16. So I had a piece up today, and Margot has always been more of a line drive hitter, not necessarily a big homer hitter. And this year he is one of the players that has adjusted and hit more line drives year over year than anybody else. So if you do just a straight ranking of line drive hitters this year, you'll hear a lot of really excellent hitters and one that deserves mention. So I'm just going to do the top 15 real quick. Austin Meadows. I mean, you got 0 homers, and that's not good. So I'm not going to say that you're happy with your Austin Meadows purchase, but at the same time, he's hitting for a great batting average for him. And there's some other things that might look good under the hood. Ty France is second. Ryan Mountcastle, I think that was an adjustment to the new park dimensions because Austin Hayes made that same adjustment. Alec Baum, hey, that's working out for him. Carlos Correa was white hot before he got hurt. JTL Realmuto, not great season, but he's a consistent line drive hitter. Jorge Polanco, Manny Margot in the top 10. John Segura, Santiago Espinal, Bo Bichette, not a great season. And then Cole Calhoun and Ryan McMahon and Brandon Marsh round out the top 15. Brandon Marsh is overperforming his BABIP a little bit. But if he's a line drive hitter, maybe he's not going to hit you 30 homers, even though he looks like a kind of a homer hitter. Maybe he's more of a guy, a little bit like Jason Worth used to be, because he does look like Jason Worth. Maybe he's more of like a 20 homer, 15 steal guy. And so maybe more of his batting average is sustainable than we think. Cole Calhoun has made some adjustments to the plate. He's put his feet closer together. And that's allowed him to kind of not kind of pull off and have this really steep attack angle. And we've seen him kind of rebound in the last couple of weeks. And Espinal, I think, is a little bit of a mini breakout player. I like him. So, Margot being on this list, I think, is a little bit of, him doing what he usually does, maybe a little bit more. And then the league kind of coming around and rewarding that type of player a little more than it used to.
Thinking about the way line drives might be tallied versus something like hard hit rate, where you're just looking at it
by StatCast
95 plus. Yeah, I was going to say, you got to be careful what line drive rate, what number you're looking at, because the difference between a fly ball and a line drive, when it's tallied manually, that can be a bit of a fuzzy line.
Yeah. Yeah, and I haven't seen as much research as in this. I know that the stickiness of line drive rate as assigned by human being is poor. But the problem is that there's a lot of, what happens when it's a hit, it's a line drive. You know what I mean? Like you look at it and your brain does that to you. You're like, oh yeah, that was a line drive. It is a really difficult thing to do without the numbers. And I suggest anybody who's listening to just watch a game and, if you're at a game with somebody and you're looking for something to do, just debate if a hit was a line drive. Especially if it was an out. You'll find, I think, better. You'll find very different sort of looks at what is a line drive or not. This one at least had the benefit of being a very clean statistical definition, 0 to 16 degrees. I didn't even add in an exit velocity component because I was only asking about, are they hitting it in the right angles? And so, yes, it's better if you hit it hard in those angles. But if you don't hit the ball hard in today's league, I mean, you're not getting playing time.
I was looking at the hard hit leaderboard for StatCast before we started recording, and I flipped it upside down because
oh gosh,
I was looking for Victor Robles. No, I was looking for players like Victor Robles just to find out who's getting duped right now. Who's really gonna fool everybody into thinking they're good, but prove that they're not. The player that I'm really surprised to see as low as he is Dylan Carlson. Among qualified hitters, Dylan Carlson has the second lowest hard hit rate across all of Major League Baseball. Only Tony Kemp is lower. Tony Kemp's got a 12.2% hard hit rate. Dylan Carlson, 19.2%. Other guys near him, Miles Straw, Nicky Lopez, Ozzy Albies. Interesting that he's on there. Kike Hernandez, Marcus Semien, a little troubling to see him down there at this point. Harrison Bader, Colton Wong, and Jesse Winker rounding out the bottom 10 right now. But to see Dylan Carlson down there, that's another couple of rocks in the backpack, so to speak, of, I got Dylan Carlson on my team, and it's another thing that he's not doing. Like, why do I keep carrying this guy in my roster? And I'm not finding a lot to believe in right now. This to me, Dylan Carlson to me looks more like a sell low player than a lot of other young players do at this stage of their career. We talked about it more from a season long, like a redraft situation on the last episode. But if you're in a keeper league or a dynasty league, you're selling at a relative low point for Dylan Carlson. But I still think you'd find more willing buyers right now than you might 3 months from now if what is happening right now kind of holds throughout the summer?
It's just concerning. It seems to have gone the wrong way. And it is interesting put into, the context of the conversation we had at 3-0 show, where I was mostly upbeat about the fact that the Cardinals are making a lot of contact, right?
Mhm.
But Carlson kind of took that too far. You cannot sell out for content above all. You just can't do that. And there's very little in the profile right now that I like, which is upsetting because visually and just sort of I like the all fields power and I liked the approach before. So I don't know that there's a player that I've fallen. You know what I mean? I don't know if there's a player who has fallen more in my esteem in dynasty leagues than Dylan Carlson this year.
I thought about it from the redraft context. Back during the outfield preview, we talked about Jared Kelenic versus Carlson at the time.
At least he hits the ball hard, though. He's hit balls like 115,
Yeah, there was a pretty big price gap for redraft leagues. It was a few rounds, and I thought straight up I wanted Carlson over Kelenic. And sure, Carlson's still with the big league club, still collecting playing time. So maybe for now, that's the right side to be on. But from a long-term perspective, that's the other question. If you're in a keeper or dynasty league and you've got a chance to go get one of these guys as a buy low, are you more likely to make a move for Kelenic or are you more likely to make a move for Carlson?
I'm gonna do Kelenic because I just think that the price of playing in the big leagues is bad ball quality. Maybe that's changing, but you just because it's been cold and the humidors and all that stuff, I'm not going to change the fact that I still value hitting the ball hard. Kelenic has a 10% bail rate, has hit the ball 114 this year, and has good contact rates in the minors. Like there is definitely a version of this where he comes out on top. It's only been 473 plate appearances. He's lost, but at least he hits the ball hard. Carlson seems lost, and he's also not hitting the ball hard. So I know that he's making more contact, and that's something to be valued. But 105 max EV, 3% barrel rate.
It's weird. It's lower. I mean, it's lower than everything we've seen from him in the previous seasons he's been in the big leagues.
And it's all going the wrong direction. He barreled a little bit, and then in his debut, and then he barreled a little bit less, and now he's not barreling at all.
I've wondered if we're going to see a demotion at some point in the near future for Carlson, if they would maybe bring up Lars Nootbaar and play Nootbaar more just for a few weeks.
Well, I mean, there's some danger because Gorman is up. I think I'm zooming to some section of the.
It's fine.
It's fine. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about the Cardinals. Gorman is up, and I don't think he's going to have a great debut personally, because he struck out 34% of the time in AAA. And I just think that kind of a profile is going to be tough. Like, think about it. Kelenic struck out like 20% of the time in AAA and comes up and strikes out 30% in the major leagues. You know what I mean? Like, what's the 34% guy going to do? So I think he'll struggle. And my personal sort of read on it is he's going to be up while Tyler Neal is down. So then Tyler Neal comes back, and I think Gorman goes back down. And then you've got a full outfield again. I guess the person that probably and it's not like Nootbaar is really raking in AAA right now. So I think that the most likely situation is Yepes starts either pushing Dickerson off the roster, which is I think already happening a little bit, or he starts pushing for an outfield job, which he's playing the outfield too. So then it'll be O'Neill versus Carlson when he comes back, and O'Neill is hitting the ball hard. Mm-hmm. He's not making much contact, but he's hitting the ball hard. So, yeah, it's possible. It's possible he goes down. It's probable that Gorman goes down. It's possible that he goes down. I did like, just to finish off the Cardinals conversation maybe a little bit, Matthew Liberatore is up, and we actually had minor league stuff plus numbers on him. He has a 91 stuff plus on the sinker, so it's not or the four seam, whatever it's called, the fastball. So it's not like I don't think he's not like a Shane Baz. He's not like a guy that I'm like, oh yeah, just roster him for the minute he gets going. He's gonna be a top 10 guy. I'm all in. He's more like a guy where I'm like, hey, I like the park. I like the defense behind him. I'm probably like the matchups. So a little bit more of a matchups play. But all that stuff other than his fastball, like his secondaries, his command, his park, his defense, those are all really good. So I'm not going to talk smack on him. And with Dakota Hudson maybe finally coming back to earth, I don't know. Like I will always predict his demise and never get it. And Jack Flaherty coming back, I could see Liberatore actually pushing his way into a rotation spot even with Flaherty back.
Yeah, I wonder if we're going to end up with a kind of an Ian Anderson sort of situation with Liberatore,
where just comes up and
stuff's a little underwhelming in the model, but it works. And part of the reason why it works is because of the park and the defense behind him, and the command really being potentially above average. I think it's at least good command right now. We've seen pretty good walk rates ever since A-ball for Liberatore, so not a lot to worry about there. Lots of good matchups. That's the key for me. There's going to be so many times you look at who he's got on the schedule, and you're going to lean more toward using him than not using him, at least in 15-team leagues. I think he's rosterable in more shallow formats. We'll get into that a bit on the Fantasy Baseball podcast later today when we got the waiver stuff. But I'm in on Liberatore, generally speaking. I think this can work because of the circumstances around him being very favorable.
Thank God for this stat. Dakota Hudson is a 4.17 ERA away from home. It's just a 2.34 at home.
That'll play.
That'll play. You idiot.
It's fun to see the Cardinals bringing these guys up. More prospects coming very soon, I think. So we've got that to look forward to. Before we dig into some of the pitching breakouts that might be in progress, we've got a couple more hitters we're going to get to. I'm intrigued by Willi Castro. I think part of the reason why I'm intrigued by Willi Castro is because batting average right now is pretty valuable. If a guy comes up and he's going to hit 270 or 280 potentially, that can be a massive boost to what is an often overlooked category, and a category where everybody seems to be struggling right now. A good batting average for a fantasy team right now is what, 235, 240? It's competitive in a lot of leagues. So if you bring in a guy that plays a lot, that can hit 270 or 280, really sitting 322 right now, and he brings a little bit of power and speed the way Willi Castro does, that could end up being a sneaky valuable pickup, in part just because of that first category.
Yeah, he's another one of these sort of line drive hitters that may not hit you more than 5, 6, 7 homers the rest of the way. But he does look like he steals some bases. My question is, where is he playing? Like, what's his deal depth chart wise? Is he replacing Baddoo?
Yeah, Baddoo down at AAA right now, so I think that's been part of how the playing time has opened up for Willi Castro.
All left field and center field.
He's played pretty much every day since May 10th. One day off against the Orioles back on Sunday.
Moving up in the batting order. That's always a good sign.
The question I have with Castro is, where do we go with the hard hit rate? The early number is not good. It is in the sub 20% range, 17.3% so far. We've seen decent max exit velo numbers from him in the past. We've seen an acceptable barrel rate before. It's 5.3% for his big league career as a whole. But I think it's the fact that you get average in speed. That's more what I'm interested in Willi Castro for. Anything he gives you power-wise is a pleasant surprise. I think this is a little bit like, it's like chasing a player like Eli White in some ways. And you also have to figure out, like, okay, yeah, you get these cheap steals. How long you get these cheap steals for, and what else will it cost you? And I feel like it's going to cost you less in the other categories with Willi Castro than it will with Eli White getting that opportunity right now in Texas.
Yeah, when I look at Willi Castro, I get a little bit of a vibe off of one of the players that I highlighted today, Ben Gamel. I think there's like that 10-10, like 280, 10-10 player, which looks it never really pops when you're searching for something, right? You're like, oh, I need some power. Well, he's not going to show up on that. Oh, I need some steals. Well, he's not going to, with 1 steal so far and projected for 4 steals in the bad X, he's probably not going to pop in that search, right? But if you're looking instead to tread water in a lot of categories or replace someone like a Tyler O'Neill, where he's not going to do anything like Tyler O'Neill, but he might keep your head above water until hopefully Tyler O'Neill comes back and does better.
Yeah. So just one of those guys that's playing at a level it's quite a bit above what we saw a season ago, has some playing time right now, and might actually be able to make a decent impact for us in some of our deeper leagues. I want to talk about Pavin Smith for a moment too, because I was looking at the barrel rate risers year over year, and he was among the biggest movers in that category. Not really an exciting player. The slash line at 220, 301, 339 doesn't get anything going for me, really, but a 14.1% barrel rate. He's kept his hard hit rate above 40% going back to last season. As we know, this is a team that needs to find ways to put runs on the board. I think it's hard to find deep league players that can exceed expectations that don't take much in fab, but I think Pavin Smith could quietly be that kind of player.
It's so weird. He does all the process things that I like, and yet none of the other stuff. And he doesn't have a track record. It's not like a guy who has a track record of power, who's doing all the things I like and just hasn't started the power yet. That would be like, okay, stamp of approval, right? You know what I mean? But here's a guy who had like a 175 ISO in AA, 130 ISOs in his first attempts at the big leagues. Like, this is not a guy who has a lot of power. Right now, he has a great barrel rate, he has a great chase rate, and he has a really good swing strike rate. He should not be striking out 30% of the time. He should be striking out 20% of the time. And really, those other stats suggest he should be walking 10% of the time, striking out 20% of the time, and have at least league average power, which would change that bat X projection with league average power. I think that changes him to a 260, 330, 420 player.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like what he did last year, but with a little bit more power. So now you're talking about a guy who could hit 270, hit you 15 homers. I don't know. That's valuable.
That plays. I mean, especially in mono leagues, if you're looking for a very gettable player showing some underlying skills growth in the face of the K rate being up, I think there's more to like than dislike. So if you're in one of those highly competitive, ultra deep leagues, I think you might be surprised at what Pavin Smith could do.
Interesting too, because he also upped his ground ball rate. This is a weird. I'm going to be watching this guy. It's a weird stat line.
He's one red hot week away from making it look very different.
And for what it's worth, Walker had a lot of these things going on before, right? And we talked about him to death. He just calls the Christian Walker podcast. But since then, now his ISO is 250. He has 9 homers. He looks primed to do this all season. Now I'm getting questions about Christian Walker versus Joey Votto, and he's kind of walking his way up the would you rather staircase. Would you rather Christian Walker, Rowdy Tellez, or Joey Votto at this point?
It's very tempting to say Walker above the rest of the group. I think Rowdy's flaws are still pretty
there.
Clear. They're all still there. His opportunity has been better than most of us expected. I think a lot of us thought he would share more time with Keston Hiura. Hiura's been more up and down and clearly on the small side of a platoon. Rowdy's at a 24.3% K rate. It's the highest he's been since 2019. The run production's been great so far, but it's a 236, 307, 496 line. It's
a
bit of a
23% better than league average, baby.
Yeah, it's just coming from that early power swell, though.
Yeah, he seems like it's maybe a little bit streaky, huh? I mean, he has these he had that 2 homer game, and he had in 4 games he had 4 homers, and he has 8 homers on the year. Right?
I think the thing that would lead me away from Walker and to Tellez in this case might be Arizona's overall offense is a problem. Like the run and RBI situation for Walker is probably a full step below what you're expecting from Rowdy. And I think the flaws
Milwaukee
I
is
just
6th in the
described,
big leagues in runs scored. Like this would be the kind of thing that could drive them late into the postseason if they can sustain it.
right? I mean, the same problems I just described with Rowdy. We're talking about a 206, 294, 456 line for Christian Walker
Right.
on a lesser team.
Arizona
So
is 23rd in runs scored.
the problem here for me is Votto, because his early season
I have no idea
direction
how
is a
to.
total puzzle.
Yeah, like for example, like we could do this the thing be like, oh, the chase rate worst of his career. Well, it's Joey friggin' Votto. Like, he could decide tomorrow to make his chase rate 15% or 12% again, and he could do it. I'm sure of it. So I don't know. He's one of these guys that seems to have utter control over his outcomes and his process, and has done 80 million different things as a big leaguer, and he could change back to what he used to do tomorrow.
Votto's season to me is kind of like if you were watching Jacques Pepin cook a duck and he burned the duck, you'd be like, what is happening right now? What? Jacques Pepin burned a duck? Like that's that's the vibe I get looking at this Votto season. This doesn't work. This is a master of the craft who's just
like 32% strikeout rate. His career is 18%, 26% chase rate by one measure, where it's 19 for his career. So yeah, he's doing all sorts of weird ass stuff.
If he would have played a full season last year, he would have hit a career high in home runs when he popped the 36 and
Yeah, I did the
129
bold
games.
prediction for 40. Has 0. Yeah, he said my bold prediction for 40 wasn't even that bold. Oops. At least I share that shame with him, right?
Yeah, your next time you interact with him is going to be pretty interesting.
Oh, not so bold, eh?
You should bring him a bottle of hot sauce. I don't know. I don't know if you would respond well to that. That might mess up the relationship a little bit, but puzzling to say the least. I would go Rowdy, probably Rowdy, Walker, Votto, but I'm not looking forward to that decision because I think there's more for Votto to bounce back to. We're seeing some signs of life from the Reds the last couple of weeks too. They're not the complete doormat they were for most of April. They're starting to look more like the competent below 500 team that many of us thought they would be going into the season. Let's go to the pitching breakouts side. We talked about a few of these names on our last episode. Keegan Aiken and Steven Matz came up last time we spoke. We talked about Eric Lauer and how the trade narrative for that deal that brought him from the Padres to the Brewers, how that's changed so much, but just a massive adjustment for him going back to the second half of last season. I think the question that I have for you coming out of the search I made was I was looking at K minus BB percentage improvers last year to this year. Shane McClanahan really pops. If we're drafting today for the rest of the season, how early does Shane McClanahan go in a draft? I mean, the would you rather names that you'd throw out there against him are probably top 10, top 15 starting pitchers.
Somebody asked me in my chat about guys who are outside the top 10 now who could, be in the top 5 next year. And I said Shane, and then I was like, wait, I think he might be in the top 5 now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I already had him like 12 going into the season, and I'm super happy with all my shares. But I do think the improvement on the shapes of it, especially of his fastball, makes me think that, going into next season, I think he's already a top 5 guy.
I think we'll be past the point where we're significantly worried about the workload just from a pure management perspective. Like maybe there's still elevated health risk because of what he's dealt with over the course of his career. But
I think the Rays at some point take the shackles off a little bit. I mean, we saw, Tyler Glasnow get the 3-4 inning treatment, and then at some point he got them. He was more of a traditional, starter that goes longer. I'm not going to say he went 9, but like he was on pace for kind of innings that you would have had from any other pitcher. Unfortunately, got hurt, but.
Yeah, the other name that I think is interesting, because we've talked about him a handful of times, is Tarik Skubal. He's made some major skills
15th in
changes.
strikeout minus walks.
I mean, it's not just the improved control, which was an improvement from his debut season. He came up in the pandemic shortened 2020 season, but he also has slashed the home run rate, the hard contact. We talked about this a lot with Tarik Skubal. He was having all sorts of issues with barrels, by far the worst among qualified pitchers in terms of the type of hard contact he was allowing last season. So to see the home run rate down alongside the walk rate, this might be among the biggest improved profiles across all pitchers in the league so far this season.
Yeah, I think it's mostly location because the stuff plus on his sinker and four seam are not very good. But the location on both is very good, and he's kind of pushed. He's been Sisyphus with these fastballs ever since he's been in the big leagues. He's pushed them both to above average. So I think now with the slider and the sinker being above average, the curveball being decent, and the changeup being a good. See, what happens is the curveball he can place. The changeup is his best pitch for action, right? So he's got an interesting mix where he's a sinker slider guy, I think, at heart, and that's something that baseball went away from. And so I think they asked him, "Hey, throw this four seam. Everybody needs a four seam with ride, blah 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 blah." And he finally got to a place where he can place it well, but he doesn't have good shape on it. He's still a sinker slider guy. The changeup has good action. The knuckle curve he can place well. So he has, in terms of placing a pitch, he has a couple options. In terms of action, he has a couple options. So he's not predictable. He's a multi-pitch guy who's really improved his command. His stuff isn't great, but I think people forget when they look at an overall stuff number like Skubal's, which is at 92 or 93. That the average for a starting pitcher is only 96, 97. So he's not like full on bad stuff. It's just around average stuff with a great home park, a large arsenal, and way better command this year.
And maybe there's a little bit of Skubal doing a great job in a lot of easier matchups too. If you look at the game log, home against the White Sox, road against the Royals, home against the Rockies, road against the Twins, road against the Astros, the two probably tough ones, road against Oakland, home against the Orioles. So 5 out of those 7 starts were at least no worse than an average matchup difficulty. And a few of those were layups, but he's making his layups and he's not beating himself with free passes. He's not having major issues with home runs. I think the Astros actually the only team that even have a home run against them. The 2 home runs he allowed came in the same start. He has not allowed a home run in any of his other 6 starts so far this season. So I'm buying it. And I guess I would say if we're talking would you rathers for Skubal, I'm sure he moved up in your rankings the last time you released the list, but he'd probably move up again if you're pushing out another list in the next couple of weeks based on what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 starts.
Yeah, for sure. He's moving up in the world. I think he's a little bit, he reminds me of Nestor Cortez, where, lots of ways to disrupt the hitter's timing. Cortez a little bit more with the deception, but lots of pitches. And in any given season, their location can pop. I'm not sure that Skubal is like a big target for me in dynasty leagues. You know what I mean? As more of a like, just think about Cortez. Like, would Nestor Cortez be someone that you would trade a lot for in a dynasty league?
No, but that might make me, because it wouldn't take a lot to get him. I almost think you have people willing to sell in a trade, move Nestor Cortez at what feels like a peak value. But I wonder if collectively we're all just wrong, and it makes sense to actually be in there and say, you know what, maybe he's not this good for the next 2 years, but he's better than people think.
You can get in trouble like that, man. I think you can get in trouble like that. I think sometimes you just have to have your method and just follow it. For me, the method says dynasty targets that I want right now are Kyle Wright and Garrett Whitlock. I'm trying to think of like young pitchers. I'm looking at young pitchers that have crossed the 400 pitch threshold, so that their pitching plus is more useful than the others. But those are the two that stand out for me. Like I would definitely go get. I think even Tanner Houck right now, he's got a 111 stuff plus 97 location. He's in between the starting rotation and not. I still think this is a decent time to go and buy him. So and then then there's the extreme version, which is Hunter Green, who has 124 stuff plus and 96 location plus, only 101 pitching plus because of his lack of command on all of his pitches. I would think I would take even Hunter Green over Nestor Cortez or Tarik Skubal just because that's that stuff. If literally he has to locate the fastball like 4 inches above where he does, and he would be so much better. I just feel like that is easier than to tell Nestor Cortez, could you literally just throw the ball 4.5 miles an hour faster?
That's a bigger ask. Yeah.
So, so I think I would still have even Hunter Green in a dynasty format. Now, in a this year format, now, like I said, we've crossed the 400 threshold. So like Cortez, Skubal, like those guys are all, I think, well above, like a Hunter Green, for example, or a Tanner Houck. Yeah.
Yeah, rest of season projections run through the auction calculator have Nestor Cortez at about $10. They've got him right there with Zach Gallen and Shane McClanahan. I think projections might be a little light on Shane McClanahan right now.
I'd be buying Gallen at that price too. I mean, to me, Gallen is already top 15.
Right.
We've liked everything. We've liked him for so long. And he's showing everything that we thought he would have.
Right. It's the matter of health coming together for him too. I mean, I'm looking at the top of that list right now. Top 5 based on rest of season projected dollar values. And I'm going to throw out 2 guys that are hurt right now. Cole's 1, Verlander's 2, Carlos Rodon is 3, Aaron Nola is 4, Zach Wheeler is 5th, and then Corbin Burns comes in 6th. Shohei Ohtani comes in 7th. Woodruff, Cease, and Gossman round out the top 10.
I'm glad Woodruff's still in the top 10, man. I got a lot of questions in the chat today about him, and I still believe he's had a couple bad starts with location. The stuff has been there. I think it's a couple bad start situation.
Do you think Sean Manaea still a little bit undervalued? I know the auction calculator was higher on him than the market going into the season, and that's still the case now. Looking at the rest of season numbers, I mean, Sean Manaea. Just in the same cluster as Walker Buehler, Alek Manoah. I feel like if you're trying to trade for any of those 3 guys, Manaea is the easiest of the 3 to go get.
Yeah. But again, right next to him in pitching plus is Tyler Megill, who I would rather trade for in a dynasty thing, especially if I was looking towards the future, than Sean Manaea, because Megill has the 108 stuff plus to Sean Manaea's 93. So I just wanted to point out that's like we're getting to the point in the season now where stuff plus, like especially with someone who has 400 pitches, stuff plus matters a little bit less, right? Because location plus has stabilized and is starting to tell us more. So this is the point of the season where when I update the Google Doc, for example, I now sort by pitching plus.
Big fan of the Google Doc, by the way. Love it. The name we should throw out there as we kind of move on from the pitchers, just thinking about Matthew Liberatore in the context of who is he comparable to in value right now in a redraft league. That way, if you're out there thinking about possible drops or just is he an upgrade or how much should I bid, those kinds of questions are all very fair questions. Are we looking at Liberatore in the same light as we're looking at maybe Mackenzie Gore, Bailey Ober? Is that kind of an appropriate placement? Jordan Montgomery, that's a $5 to $8 range rest of season in terms of projected value?
Yeah, I think that's not bad. In fact, I think Montgomery is a decent comp.
Montgomery without having to deal with the AL East and Yankee Stadium.
But added risk of going back down.
Yeah.
So like $3-4 guy. I think I might keep Montgomery over him just because it's more of a sure thing. I'd lean towards like NFBC where it's like, would I be dropping Montgomery, who I believe is a rosterable player for someone who might be more of a streamer? So there's a bit of a line there, but
we got a request to bring back prospect of the week. And I think we sort of lost prospect of the week when the minor league season started late a year ago, and it just kind of threw us out of our routine. So yeah, we're bringing back prospect of the week. It's a great segment, and we'll even get the Eno jingle in there at some point. It's somewhere on my computer. I don't know where. If I ever find it, I will bring it back. But the point of this is to identify players that might be a little bit overlooked. Sometimes we'll put a spotlight on a prospect that you've heard about for a long time if he's doing something really good, or hopefully not really bad, but you never know. That could also garner some prospect of the week status. But I'll kick it off. I've got Mike Burrows, a pitcher in the Pirates system, currently at AA. He's got a 32.5% K rate at that level, showing improved control. Did have some limited innings pitched last year as a result of an oblique injury that cost him some time. Scouting reports point to the curveball as easily his best pitch, and there are some questions about whether or not he's going to be a starter long term because the delivery is not clean and polished the way that people like to see. But there's a chance there's 3 pitches here, and every time I look at a Pirates pitcher who's kind of stuck maybe in between in the eyes of scouts, I err on the side of seeing an opportunity for that pitcher to get a chance to start because they're not that close to competing again. And obviously, there's a lot more long-term value if they can find a way to get that third pitch to work, to get that command at a level where they can trust Burrows in a consistent 5-inning sort of role. But probably a very gettable player if you're talking about keeper in dynasty leagues, where you can go ahead and stash a pitcher away who might only be, a year or so away from getting a chance at the big league level.
Nice. Yeah, mine, I don't know actually how far away they are. They are 22 and 20 respectively. I'm going to do 2. And the reason I'm going to do 2 is I sorted the AA Eastern League by strikeout rate reverse, right? And you've got at the top Will Brennan, who's the 10% strikeout rate, but he's got a bit of a softer isolated slugging. So what I wanted was top 30 in strikeout rate, but an ISO over 200. There's about 5 of these players. Some other ones are Jover Peguero with Pittsburgh, Ezekiel Tovar, but that's Colorado, and I believe that's up in the altitude. So Aaron Shunk also being there doesn't surprise me. And then Blake Sabol, who I've never heard of. But the prospects of the week for me are Gunnar Henderson and Logan O'Hoppe.
I'm glad I didn't pick O'Hoppe because I did see him as I was going through the leaderboard.
Nice. And the reason I did a 2-pack is the less deep leagues. You may find some Gunnar Henderson availability. He was a top 68 prospect, though. He's top 100. So if every top 100 prospect is owned, he's probably gone. But he took a major step forward this year in terms of really quieting down the strikeout rate, but also he right now has a 22% walk rate against a 17% strikeout rate and a 255 ISO. He's absolutely in the middle of that kind of breakout that I think would lead to, if, when they update, he could be a top 15, top 20 type prospect. Like he's a shortstop who's doing everything correct, is not blocked anywhere. He's 20. What is he? He's the 20-year-old. He's 20 years old and AA doing this. Like, this is absolutely the kind of stuff that rockets you up the top of the prospect list. And if you want to go get him, if you think you're rebuilding, you want to go get him before those updates put him there, then go do it, because you might still get someone who thinks, he's not a top 50 prospect right now because Fangraphs has him 68 or whatever. This might be a guy who you wake up and he's top 15 this season. So that's for the shallower leagues. Logan O'Hoppe was not ranked in the Fangraphs top 100. He is someone that people know about. I've actually interviewed him and talked to him for a piece that I did on his hitting coordinator. And I thought he had a really good head on his shoulders. And he was talking about pairing the kind of the analytics with a really free-flowing approach at the plate, a really kind of athletic, nice, easy swing. And right now, 11% walk rate, 17% strikeout rate, 262 ISO. It looks like it's all beautiful. He's a catcher, though, so that's a little bit of an asterisk. They take longer. He's 22, may take him till he's 25 to debut. But everything looks really good. And if I didn't see that C up at the top of his page, I don't know that I would tell you it would take 3 years for him to get there.
Well, already at AA, it is Reading, so you got to be a little careful with the power numbers there. But there's a lot more than just that park happening in the profile, as you pointed out. And that name you mentioned, kind of in passing, that I think is worth highlighting a little bit is Ezekiel Tovar. I know he was pretty popular just a few weeks ago. I think it was Jeff Pontus had him in one of his write-ups over at Baseball America. He's a 20-year-old shortstop, and the Rockies AA affiliate is Hartford.
So I don't think it's not Colorado Springs.
No, it's not one of the extreme environments. I mean, he's young, he's controlling the strike zone, there's power, there's speed. I think he's one of the biggest prospect risers of the season so far, just based on the performance, age to level. Obviously, a pretty clean path to the big leagues eventually, too, once he's ready. So if he happens to be out there in a league, even when you're only keeping a handful of prospects, I think there's a chance he might be the kind of high ceiling guy that you'd want to stash in that kind of format.
I think Gunnar and Tovar are like that. Like, I'm in a league, the Pitchfork League that I'm in. What's up, Pitchfork? That league, we keep four prospects each. And so you're always looking for someone to, in fact, once we hang up, I'm going to go look if Gunnar Anderson's available in that league.
No, like, here's the key, though. If you're in a league like that and you have prospects that are higher ranked and you're trying to make a move to help for this season, trade the more highly regarded prospect and backfill from the wire with these guys that can move up into that top 50 range in the not so distant future, because then you're just taking advantage of what is likely to happen as more and more players graduate, as new lists come out.
Yeah. I mean, in that situation with a 4, I don't value prospects highly unless they're like a top 5 prospect, just because you only get to have 4. That means like 50 prospects are owned in the league. It's like, good luck.
Let's get to a few mailbag questions here. This one comes from Ryan. He's got 4 hitters. He wants to know who is most likely to figure it out going forward. He's got Alex Verdugo, Jesse Winker, Brian Reynolds, we discussed a few weeks ago, and Tyler O'Neill, who just recently landed on the IL. So, and this is a 10-team mixed league that Ryan happens to be playing in. So there's definitely some drop potential at the bottom end of this group if there are some long-term warning signs that you see. I think since we last spoke about Reynolds, not a whole lot has changed with his line. I think he's been a little bit better, but it's still...
He struck out a little bit less, but I still see him. I think he's 260, 14 homers the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's still a concern there. But as far as the other guys go, Verdugo, O'Neill, Winker, I think we talked about Winker a little bit on our last episode. How do you compare Verdugo and O'Neill to Winker and Reynolds?
It's funny. I'm looking at Winker's projections there for 260-14. He's really stuck here. These guys are very similar now. Verdugo's projections are for 280-10. Which is slightly better in one way and slightly worse in another. I mean, these guys are all really... I would just try to hold on to O'Neill. He's the only one that still has the opportunity kind of to clear that group. And if you can put O'Neill on the IL and stash him, then maybe you can put off this question till later, because O'Neill just went on the IL. So maybe he has the ability to put O'Neill on the IL and give those other guys a couple more weeks and then drop one of them, because those guys are way more equivalent to me than O'Neill.
Well, I think the thing that stands out to me too, again, is environment and what these guys are doing. The Cardinals scoring more runs than expected. We talked about that on the 3-0 show, and they're doing that despite the slow start from O'Neill. O'Neill has run a little bit. Other guys in this group mostly don't run. They run, like Verdugo runs a little. Winker doesn't run at all. Reynolds can run a little. But you're getting more run potential, more RBIs, more raw power, and probably more steals from O'Neill, even though it's been a rough start so far. So he's kind of first in terms of likelihood of being the most valuable, figuring it out, however you want to describe it. Then there's a gap. I think I'm more likely to hold, if I could only hold one of Verdugo, Winker, and Reynolds, I think Verdugo is the player I'd actually be most likely to hold in a shallow league. Even
his
though
batting average is the standout ability, his possible batting average. I mean, it's 20 right now.
Keeps putting balls in play. And I think compared to the Pirates and Mariners, you're getting more support from that lineup. And if we keep compressing,
or you're potentially getting more support. I mean,
you,
yeah.
you should, but if you keep compressing homers and steals as much as we have, then runs and RBIs and average are where you're going to get an advantage. And I think that just slightly favors Verdugo. I think I'm Winker over Reynolds if I'm choosing between those two, but that's probably the smallest gap of any two players on the list right now.
Winker's power process stats are not good right now.
It's so frustrating, man. The timing of that relative to NL labor will always stick in my craw. I'm never because I mean, if you wouldn't have been available, if the move had happened before we had our draft, and I would have got a different $20 player, and probably would be better, most likely. Even though, as you learned earlier this week, that was a team where I did a lot of things wrong. But thanks a lot for that question, Ryan. Jake wants to know, with Statcast and xStats, can you still use xStats as a comparative tool, just looking at players side by side, even if the xStats themselves are not calibrated for this terrible run environment that we're currently in?
Yeah, I was just trying to point this out, and it's hard to, it might be easier in this format to kind of explain what I'm saying than in like a chat answer. But what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't look at one player page and say, oh, this guy minus 30 XBA, boom, biggie. Like, let's pick this guy up, because everyone's minus 30. But if you do a ranking of XBA minus BA and you see, oh, he's minus 30, league average is minus 15, he is a little bit, more unlucky than league average. That still, I think, has some signal in it. So yes, the way that you put it, that they're ranking relative to the league in those stats, I think is still somewhat meaningful. Yeah.
Looking at it too, just from the four players we were just talking about in the last question, sorting by X slug, Alex Verdugo clearly number one, Winker Reynolds at 2 and 3, and there's a drop before O'Neill. So that's kind of interesting too, just as another little way you can look at some
O'Neill
of the
has the
underlying
lowest
numbers.
X slug.
Very surprising. He has the highest barrel rate, but the lowest X slug.
Well, X slug actually takes into consideration contact rate, right? Because it's a slugging number.
Right. But maybe it over penalizes the high whiff players like O'Neill.
Possibly.
Maybe.
I mean, what would his X ISO be is another question, right?
Yeah.
We're not expecting a high batting average from Tyler O'Neill.
I guess it'd be 161 doing the quick math because the numbers are right in front of me. And Reynolds
That's a
would
weird
be 170
for me.
Yeah, that seems low.
I mean, projected for a 222 with an 11% barrel rate. This is Tyler O'Neill we're talking about. I still I hope that the IL what the IL list for me has been for Tyler O'Neill is a lifeline, because not only do I not have to consider dropping him now, but now when he comes back, depending on your league rules, you might be able to get a look, and see how he looks coming back. Maybe a minor league look. So I'm not out on Tyler O'Neill.
Nah, I'm not out. I was struggling to pay full freight back on draft day because it was a new career high in terms of where he was being drafted. But I also wasn't sitting here saying this can't possibly work. He's going to fall apart. And so therefore no victory lap, just more of a, I like some other guys a little more than O'Neill.
Well, what I ended up doing was that, there was obviously risk with the strikeout rate. I ended up taking him in leagues where he fell a little bit.
Yeah.
So I only have like 2 or 3 shares, but I listen, I'm with you. I know it's tough to look at that name in the lineup and just be like, I've had people adding me that he's going to be in the minors. It's still quality contact when he makes contact, and he struck out 30% of last year too. I just see someone who's stuck in between the fastball and slider right now. So Austin Riley used to be stuck between the fastball and slider, and he's obviously not stuck anymore. So
the other question Jake had that was related is, if you're looking at something like xWOBA and you're looking at the rolling averages that we've been talking about a lot in recent weeks, is it still meaningful despite the lack of calibration? If you see the trend going in the right direction, is that still something you want to get behind?
I guess so. And I did want to point out that I think that I believe a little bit more in the signal in XBA than I would be in X slugging, because XBA is about those line drive angles. You know what I mean? And X slugging is about those power launch angles. And we're gonna see a larger problem in the launch angle and the power angles. So X-Woba kind of takes the two of them and smushes them together.
Pretty interesting, too, looking back at the 4 outfielders from a few minutes ago. Jesse Winker, 294 XBA, Verdugo, 287, Reynolds, 249, O'Neill, 220. So the other little separator if you're trying to sift through a problem similar to that one. One more question to get to. This one came in from Rob, more or less just a question about what we're seeing from Julio Urias now, because there were some early warning signs. Has anything changed in the underlying numbers with the pitching model or with performance that would make us any more or less confidence in Julio Urias than we were probably about a month or so ago when he first came up as someone that might not be as valuable as people thought he would be back on draft day?
Yeah, there's still some worrying signs in terms of like the velo and stuff, but when his first 2 starts, 87 stuff plus, 94 stuff plus, a good example of why 3 starts is important, because the third start was 116 stuff plus, and ever since then he stayed above 100. So he has managed to keep his locations really strong all the way through, but he's been basically a 110 pitching plus guy for the last 5 starts. I was always a cautious hold because I believed in him so much, and because he hadn't really crushed that pre-pitch special. He was really affected, I think, poorly by the lockdown and not being able to be in touch with the coaching staff. But right now, his fastball is an 83 stuff plus, changeup 109, curveball, it's a sweeper. It's one of the better ones in the league. It's 137. So he's got 2+ secondaries. The fastball is located enough to make it work. I do think his dynasty status is affected by this, because that fastball, as you can tell, the stuff on that is a lot softer now. And we're talking about a guy who has had labrum surgery and kept a nice 94 mile an hour, 95 mile an hour velo for 5 years, and now has dropped below 93, which is below average for the league. So I think in terms of the rest of this year, I'm pretty happy with what he's done, and I think he's going to be fine. I think the projections are actually a little bit too pessimistic about him, but in terms of dynasty value, I do think he's taken a hit.
You know what? I also am looking at Urias and seeing he's a free agent after the end of next season. I don't think the Dodgers are extending him. I think he's a guy they're going to let walk.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough long-term concern here, even if you believe he's a top 20, top 25 pitcher with ease the rest of the way. I think you can certainly make that case.
Like, what if he comes back next year and he's sitting 96? I would be like, well, that's good news. I would also be like, can he sustain it? Is it good for him?
Yeah, just a really tough pitcher to make the 5+ year commitment that it's going to take to probably get him in free agency once he gets there.
Look at what happened with Luzardo. Like, it was really nice that we got all that extra velo, and it did bump him into playable status, but it was tough on his arm.
Massive age gap here, but just thinking about multi-pitch guys that locate really well and had a lot of success with that approach. I mean, his former teammate, Hyunjin Ryu, is that the second version of Urias as we get further into his career? Is that the type of pitcher that he should more or less try to be?
I mean, if you're lucky, Adam Wainwright, because or like a Rich Hill with slightly better command and other pitches. I don't know. Like, he has one great breaking ball. So there's stuff I like about it. But in terms of like remaining a top 20, top 15 type pitcher, I don't know if you do that, once you start having a 92 mile an hour fastball, for example.
I think there's something with Urias though right now where his trade value in fantasy, his reputation is still above what he actually is right now, even with some more encouraging stuff numbers over the last 4 or 5 starts.
It's an interesting sell high in dynasties, right? Like,
I think it's a better time to cash out.
Yeah, maybe you could go get like a a Corbin Carroll, like we've been talking about, maybe you could go get like a really nice hitting prospect,
If you're in a dynasty league and you can trade Urias straight up for Corbin Carroll right now, I think you should do it.
It's not a bad one.
That'd
And
be
even if you
trade.
traded him for like a Gunnar Henderson, plus a young major league or something, you would shoot yourself in the foot a little bit. So you'd have to consider how competitive you are this year. But
yeah, I see a guy that is not likely to be a top 10 starting pitcher again when I look at Urias right now. Doesn't mean he's bad, just means that we've seen the very best of him, and it might be more of a long-term future in that SP2, SP3 range as opposed to having that fantasy ace status that he had for a little while. So take that for what it's worth. Hopefully it is in some way helpful. I am glad I don't have him all over the place because I think it's going to be a little more of a sweat than we anticipated at the beginning of the season. If you got questions for a future episode, you can send those our way via email, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com, or drop them in the comment section under this video on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd appreciate it if you took a minute to leave us a nice rating and review. And if you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, you should get one. It's $1 a month at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.